Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot, we charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Hello and welcome to mini episode 360 of Real Life Ghost Stories, and I have 2 spooky stories for you today, and the last story comes from the 28th of April 2024, and story number 1 comes from Anne. I don't even know what this would be categorised as, but this happened to me and my friend a few weeks ago and we're stumped. She was upset, so I said I'm coming over to hang out so that she wasn't alone, even though she didn't specifically ask me to. Just trying to be a good friend. I drove the 1 mile to her apartment, so it took me max 5 minutes to get there. I buzzed her from the front door, but she didn't answer. I buzzed again, nothing. At that point, someone came out, so I let myself in. I hit the button in the elevator and went to her door and buzzed her Ring doorbell. I could hear the TV, but she didn't come to the door. I texted her that I was outside. At this point, a neighbour came out of the elevator, walked down the corridor and looked at me strangely. Didn't say anything, just walked by. I rang my friend's bell again, still nothing. I could still hear the TV and knocked loudly on the door. I texted again and waited. For some reason, I took a picture of her door to prove I was there at the time. Another of her neighbours walked by, giving me another weird look. At this point, I rationalised that since she didn't ask me to come over, I must be imposing on her, so I went back home. 20 minutes later, sitting at home, I looked down to see a response from her from the time I was in her hallway. She had been to the door both times I buzzed her Ring doorbell, but she said I wasn't there. I was so glad to have taken that picture, sent it to her with the timestamp and the location details that Apple kindly provides. We're both absolutely confused by whatever this experience was, but I can't think of anyone else to share it with. Sorry, hang on a second. Does your friend have the Ring doorbell footage? So, you buzzed her doorbell, she heard it, she went to the door, you weren't there. Everybody's looking at you weirdly. Why is everybody looking at you weirdly, by the way? Why are the neighbours looking at you weirdly? Is it because you're there so long, trying to get into the house? Oh, I'm so confused by all of this. Because surely there would be a ring, I don't have a Ring doorbell, but I'm sure they have footage of every time somebody rings it or activates it. So if this is like other universes, you're ringing the Ring doorbell in her universe. So you can physically ring the doorbell in her universe, but she is coming out and can't see you. Please, this is hurting my brain. I'm sad. I want to know why the neighbours are looking at you weirdly, because 2 neighbours physically saw you, and they're giving you this weird look. I would want to know, why are you looking at me so weirdly? Is it because you're knocking on the door repeatedly and you're not getting an answer? Is that why they're looking at you weirdly? Or is there another reason as to why they're looking at you weirdly? And say, right, if like you said, maybe she just didn't want to spend time with you, that would not be your excuse. I'm just going to put that out there. If somebody doesn't want to spend time with you, right, if somebody's going to be like, oh, actually, this person has come over and I don't really want to spend time with them, whatever, you're not going to be like, no, I opened the door, you just had physically disappeared somehow, or you were invisible somehow. You just be like, oh, sorry, I didn't hear with the TV on, I had my headphones in, whatever, I don't think you're going to turn your excuse into a paranormal mystery. I just feel like this is something to do with alternate universes, but I just don't know. I don't know what. Maybe last year or the year before, somebody left a pretty vicious comment on my Instagram. They were obviously a long time listener, and I read the comment before they swiftly deleted it. I think they may have posted it from the wrong Instagram account, but I saw it, and part of their big issue with me personally was the fact that I always say I don't know what to tell you. You know, I don't know what this paranormal activity is, and I think of them every time I say I don't know. So if that was you, I just need you to know that I saw your comment, and I still have no idea. So sorry. My best guess, though, in all seriousness, is it feels like when I read these stories that something happens in the space-time continuum where like things just I don't know, they just don't seem to go quite right. Where like the laws of physics and space and time don't seem to just get it right for a brief moment, and we end up with situations like this. But I am very sorry, because I can do nothing to alleviate your curiosity and your confusion on this one.
Small details are big surfaces. Tight corners are odd shapes. Flat, rounded, textured, or tall. Whatever your next project, there's a spray paint pattern that's just right. Because Rust-Oleum's new Custom Spray 5-in-1 gives you control with 5 different spray patterns. So you can tackle nooks, crannies, edges, and curves without worrying about drips, runs, uneven coverage, or anything else. Custom Spray 5-in-1. Only from Rust-Oleum.
Why don't more infant formula companies use organic, grass-fed whole milk instead of skim? Why don't more infant formula companies use the latest breast milk science? Why don't more infant formula companies run their own clinical trials? Why don't more infant formula companies use more of the proteins found in breast milk? Why don't more infant formula companies have their own factories instead of outsourcing their manufacturing? We wondered the same thing. So we made ByHeart, a better formula for formula. Learn more at byheart.com.
And story number 2 comes from Jessica. This is a collection of stories from my family, the women in particular. My great-grandmother was known for being intuitive, although I don't have details other than she knew things. My mom and aunts would say, Mama could make you do things. I remember how horrifying this sounded when I heard this. However, it was nothing sinister. If she wanted you to call her, she'd make you call her, that kind of thing. She would think about you calling her, and then you would. I got to meet her when I was around 5 or 6 years old. My great-grandparents lived in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and we drove up from South Carolina to visit. We got in late, so they left a key for us. They lived in one of those long, narrow townhouses, one unit stacked on top of another. Theirs was on the upper level, and we had to take a dark and narrow staircase up to the front door. As a young, skittish child, I was on high alert from the moment we entered the building. We were to sleep in the front room of the home, and there was a creepy hallway at the back of the house where the bathroom and primary bedroom were located. My older sister was in the bathroom as my parents made beds up front, and I hovered nearby. All of a sudden, we heard a blood-curdling scream from the back of the house. Not a frightened shriek, but a harrowing, make-your-blood-run-cold kind of scream. My parents looked at each other in alarm, and my mom took off down the hallway to find my sister. I clung to my dad, while he looked around for something, a weapon. This was the 80s, so no cell phones. My mom got to the bathroom and my sister opened the door, saw the look on my mom's face, and slammed the door shut. Whatever was out there was not getting to her. Turns out it was Mommer. We learned that night that she had a recurring nightmare and would wake up with that single terrifying scream. They felt horrible for traumatizing us. It became a story told many times, of course, and I've always wondered what her dream was about. Whenever my family would share stories about any of their paranormal experiences, I would listen intently, no matter how many times I'd heard them before. There was the story about my grandmother seeing my grandfather standing at the foot of her bed one night when he was overseas fighting in World War II. He was a pilot in the Air Force, and later said that around the time my grandmother saw his image, he was terribly homesick and scared because his squadron was about to go on a particularly dangerous mission. After World War II ended, my grandparents were stationed in Germany with their 3 girls. My aunt Gretchen, the eldest, visited Mad King Ludwig's castle with another family. After waiting in a long line to get in, they were about to enter when Gretchen's excitement turned to dread. She wanted to leave but didn't know why. When they entered the great hall of the castle, she looked up and pointed out the king standing on the stairs. Everyone laughed at her cute little joke because they could not see him. She saw and felt things here and there, but not all the time or everywhere she went. My aunt grew up to be a teacher and rented a house in Florida with 2 other women at the start of her career. She said the house was haunted by an unpleasant female spirit. They all felt it was a female and that she was angry. She stayed mostly in an area of the house they all learned to avoid. They lived there for 6 months, and regularly each of them would wake up to a roommate getting into their bed saying, "She's in my room." One time in particular, my aunt was grading papers at the kitchen table with her cat next to her on the table, helping. She said the room filled with cold, the door slammed shut, and the cat stood up and hissed at the empty space. She and her roommates moved the minute their lease was up. My Aunt Gretchen passed away in 2006 from cancer, with all of us women with her until the end. She was an amazing woman, wildly intelligent, strong, and often terrifying, but you wanted her to like you. Years after Gretchen's death, my Aunt Linny, the youngest sister, was diagnosed with cancer. She was in her bathroom looking out the window one day and saw Gretchen in her backyard, but as a child, and she just knew she needed to see her doctor. She asked for a chest x-ray. Everyone had been smokers at one time or another. On the x-ray, there was a small cancerous mass in her lung. They caught it early. My paranormal experiences have been few and subtle. I've had dream visitations from deceased loved ones. One of the strongest was from a friend who took their own life. In the weeks following his death, I felt a lot of distress and just kept sending him love, hoping he would find his way out of whatever darkness had swallowed him. Weeks later, I had a dream I was walking on a beach boardwalk and suddenly the crowds parted and there he was, a short distance in front of me. We ran to each other and hugged. I felt light all around us and knew that he was okay. I've experienced a lot of déjà vu throughout my life, always concentrated around periods of major transition, job changes, moves, new life experiences. I've had one premonitory dream. In college, I dreamed I was driving to the emergency room near where I lived in a red car. I was taking someone else, and I did not own a red car. A few months later, I drove my Aunt Gretchen to the ER in her car, which was red. She was diagnosed with cancer later that day. It was very unsettling when I remembered my dream. I live in Charleston, South Carolina. Before we were married, my husband and I lived in a house in the downtown area for several years. This wasn't one of the old fancy homes in the tourist district, but a small home built in the 1940s. This house was purchased by my husband's great-grandparents and was passed through the family until we rented it for a while before it was finally sold. The house always had a heaviness to it. We knew there had been a suicide there. An unknown ancestor suffered from cancer with inadequate symptom management and took their own life to escape the pain. My husband's grandfather was the last to live there before we moved in. He didn't die in the home, but he was very attached to it. He had a long history of alcoholism, and while he was a sober man in the years leading up to his death, I've always felt his struggles may have contributed to the heaviness in the home. He could be a very cantankerous man, and was not afraid to share his opinions. When we lived there, I often woke up at night to see swirling smoke near the bed. I always brushed it off as my eyes adjusted, but it doesn't happen much anymore. Only a few times in the years since we've moved. His grandfather was a heavy smoker, and in the house, the smell of cigarette smoke would come and go. One night, my not-yet husband and I got into a terrible fight, an ugly shouting match, and we both went to bed angry. The next day, I opened our kitchen cabinets and found that a small Pyrex bowl had shattered. When I say shattered, it was like the glass exploded, with ground glass bits all over. The bowl was sitting on top of a ceramic plate that was untouched. It was the weirdest thing. My brain still can't figure out how it happened. And I remember feeling in my gut that his grandfather did not like the fight we had and was letting us know. Or maybe the intensity of the anger we felt did it. It certainly looked like how we felt that night during the fight. My mom had strong intuition about things but no overt psychic abilities. She had a strange experience when she was younger, probably in her late 20s. She was leaving work after hours and was the only person in the building. There was a steep stairwell that led from her floor to the front entrance. She was near the top of the stairwell on her way down when she lost her balance and began to fall. She tried to grab the railing, but it was out of reach. She said she felt herself tilt forward past the point of no return, and then she felt a hand on her shoulder that pulled her back upright. She absolutely knew that no one was behind her. She took a breath, descended the stairs, turned to look at the empty space and said, "Thank you." She always felt that it was her deceased grandfather who saved her. After my Aunt Gretchen died in hospice care, I found my calling in nursing. Since becoming a nurse 15 years ago, I've stayed in the hospital setting and moved from acute care to critical care to palliative care. Throughout my career, I've taken care of many people facing end of life and difficult decisions about their health care. I've learned that my intuition is strong in these moments, and I've come to listen and trust this guidance. My training and experience were invaluable in supporting my mom who had COPD. As her disease progressed over a 20-year period, I transitioned into the role of caregiver. The week my mom passed away, we were all at her home. She was in hospice care and doing very well until she had an unexpected collapse. When we first arrived, the hospice nurse thought she might only have 24 hours. She'd had a low oxygen event, had fallen and was weak and confused. We had entered that space where the hospice bed is delivered and you begin round-the-clock care. I'm the only medical person in my family, so this fell largely to me. As I slept in the living room next to her bed the night of her collapse, I awoke ahead of my alarm, set for her next dose of medications. I lay there looking at her, and she was so still and pale that I thought that she had gone. Then I saw her breathing, and I forced myself to get up and prepare her medication. As I moved to moisten her lips before giving her the medication, my eyes landed on her face. She had been semi-conscious for nearly 24 hours, but now her beautiful cornflower blue eyes were open and bright. She was looking past me to somewhere far away. She blinked and looked at me, and a smile spread across her face, a smile full of childlike wonder. I felt peace wash over me like ocean air. And she said, still smiling, "So pleasantly beautiful." I had so many questions. Not wanting to break the spell, I just watched her. She kept smiling and shaking her head in wonder. A moment later, she shifted her body, and I asked if she needed to go to the bathroom. She said yes. I helped her slide to the edge of the bed, and she sat there a moment, shaking her head, and repeated, "So pleasantly beautiful." My mom stayed with us for another 5 days. She wasn't quite herself, but we were blessed with this extra time for family visits and preparing ourselves to say goodbye. Every time I helped her up from her bed to her walker, I drew her in for a hug and held her for a moment. The day after her fall, my mom, ever the mischievous middle child, played one of her last pranks. Earlier, I had helped her shower, accidentally unleashing the cold water on her in the beginning. All the men were outside, and my sister and my niece and my Aunt Linny stood around my mom's bed fussing over her. She asked us what had happened to her. As resident nurse, I stepped in and explained, trying to reassure her that it was okay that she couldn't remember things right now. I must have sounded patronising because the next day she said, "Well, I don't recognise you." We all froze with awkwardness and horror. Then she grinned impishly and said, "Kidding." This was followed by an explosion of laughter and me calling her an asshole. My mom died on Friday the 13th, on the night of a full harvest moon. I always thought my mom was a bit witchy. She loved nature, except for spiders, and believed in spirits, fairies, and all things magical. She died in a leap year, so the 3 and 6 month anniversaries of her death also fell on Friday the 13th. I'm sure she loved that. A few months after her death, she came to me in a dream. We were home for a visit with my dad and I was asleep in the living room where she died. In the dream, I was helping her get ready in the bathroom, and she was playfully chastising me for the way I was combing her hair. As I moved to help her up from the chair, I thought, I'll hug her like I did the week she died because these hugs are limited. I pulled her to me for a hug and was enveloped in light. I could feel her energy, her soul, and I said, oh my God, you're really here. I could feel her laughter and delight that I had recognised her and that she surprised me. She loved surprising people. After this dream, my grief eased significantly. It was the most vivid visitation I've ever had. In the months that followed, I would occasionally smell her perfume in their house when I visited, though all her clothes were gone. On one visit, I woke early, hearing my dad in the kitchen. I decided I wasn't ready to deal with him yet and fell back asleep only to be awakened by someone swatting the top of my foot. My eyes flew open, but no one was there. My mom used to do this to get me up as a teenager. Apparently she wanted me to go check on my dad. Sadly, his daily drinking had turned to heavy drinking during my mom's illness, negatively affecting both their relationship and his reliability as a caregiver. He succumbed to alcoholism and died 2 years after my mom. It was a brutal 2 years. My dad wasn't my dad anymore. Only the worst versions of him were left. My mom showed up for me often, as I was forced to remain in the role of caregiver. Both she and my Aunt Gretchen came in dreams, in a warmth that would wash over me when things were bad. When I doubted my decisions, they supported me from a spiritual level. I had no idea that was even possible, but they did it. And I am thriving in my life again, in part because of these amazing women. I'll leave you with one last oddity. We moved into our current home the year before my mom died. The first time she visited here, she got this weird look on her face when she entered. It's a 1970s style split level home with some remodelling, and you can see most of the home when you enter. She looked at me and said, "Jessica, I know this house. It's like I've spent time here." It was weird and we were both a little spooked, but now it makes sense in a way. I know she's here with us, checking in, spending time with her beloved granddaughter and looking after us. Jessica, this story, or this collection of stories, I suppose, was absolutely beautiful. Firstly, I think, and even though it was only a short snippet of a story, that bit where your grandmother saw your grandfather standing at the foot of her bed is really fascinating. And there are so many stories like that come out of, war, or people being away at sea, people being distressed or homesick or scared, and there's some sort of apparition elsewhere. Almost like the person who is at home waiting for that person to come home can sense that person's anguish, sense that their spirit, their energy is off kilter. And I think we see that as well when people are close to death or before people die. We hear stories all the time of people who they love, seeing them before they die or seeing them at the time of death. And I think it's kind of a similar thing here, that there's that fundamental shift in energy, and then a loved one sees that person. And it sounds like your aunt had a pretty shit time in that rental. Oh God, imagine living in a house where every so often you're like, she's in my bedroom, can I sleep in with you please? And then your aunt has that experience of the room going cold, the door slamming shut and the cat hissing at empty space. Oh, I'd be burning it to the ground. I also think it's amazing that your aunt saw her sister years after her death in the garden as a child, and then she was like, right, I know I need to see a doctor. Like, that's an incredible experience with the afterlife, that her sister came to her and she was able to extrapolate, shit, I need to see a doctor. And ultimately, I would imagine it seems to have saved her, you know, that they caught the cancer early because of this. And I also think it's amazing that you were living in that house, that had gone through your husband's family, and there was still sort of feelings and sensations that pointed to his family and his grandfather, the smell of cigarette smoke. And I do find it intriguing that Pyrex glass shattered. I was watching a video recently on YouTube about Pyrex dishes. Listen, I'm 34, okay? That's about as rock and roll as I get nowadays. And I was watching this video about Pyrex glasses, and apparently they shatter in extreme temperatures. So if you heat it up to an extreme temperature and then you put it into a cold temperature really quickly, then they shatter really easily, right? But if it was just sitting in your cupboard, I wonder if it was to do with energy, either from his grandfather or either from the kind of energy of the fight and the emotional turmoil of the fight that you guys had. I tend not to lose my temper very often, but I do think it'd be quite cool if when you did lose your temper, like a glass smashed around you or something, people would be like, whoa. I mean, that's scary, but also pretty impressive. And I love those stories of people who are falling down a flight of stairs or falling from a height, or, you know, we've loads of stories of children who are falling down the stairs and suddenly they're saved, or they feel somebody pull them back, or they feel, in the case of children, they often say they felt somebody like carry them down the stairs. I think those stories are pretty amazing. And I do think that nursing somebody who you love, nursing your mother at the end of her life, must be simultaneously rewarding and devastating and incredibly emotionally taxing. And I'm glad that in the afterlife she has found ways to come back to you in her dreams, and that even still now her and her sisters are able to guide you and look after you, and you know that when shit's going down they will be there by your side. That's pretty beautiful. Thank you so much to Anne and Jessica for sending in your stories. Remember, the last story came from the 28th of April 2024. And if you would like to send in your story, you can do so by emailing it to reallifeghoststoriespodcast@gmail.com. You can also check out the website reallifeghoststoriespodcast.com. And if you are desperate for some extra content, you can subscribe to the Patreon. That is patreon.com/reallifeghoststories, where for $5 a month or $2 a month you get access to heaps of extra content, as well as every single main and mini episode completely ad-free. And on that note, I shall see you next time.
Why don't more infant formula companies use organic, grass-fed whole milk instead of skim? Why don't more infant formula companies use the latest breast milk science? Why don't more infant formula companies run their own clinical trials? Why don't more infant formula companies use more of the proteins found in breast milk? Why don't more infant formula companies have their own factories instead of outsourcing their manufacturing? We wondered the same thing. So we made ByHeart, a better formula for formula. Learn more at byheart.com.